I'm Dave.
And I'm Sean.
And this is Barstools
and Bandtalk, the complete maritime music bucket list. Or as we like to say, complete music bucket list.
Complete list. We're the list of everything.
Right. So we have another treat tonight. Our good buddy Bruce Nelson hooked us up with this gentleman. And we're not even going to let the cat out of the bag. We're going to let him go over his resume, his CV, if you will. But he's done an awful lot in this whole music business. He's an inventor. He's an innovator. And we only chatted with him really quickly, but he's a pretty cool dude. And we're looking forward to this.
We love talking to the techs because it gives it a whole new level of complexity and everything that's involved with music. Not just watching your band play. There's a lot more to it, and he'll tell us more about it. So please welcome Dave Bratt. And here he is. There.
G'day, sir.
Hello, hello.
There you are.
So in our intro, which you probably didn't hear, Bruce Nelson sent me some background on you, and you have quite the background. You're an innovator, you're an inventor, you're the whole nine yards. So we thought we would just say, hey, who's Dave Bratt? What's he all about? And let you tell our audience yourself.
Oh, my.
No pressure, brother.
No pressure there. Well, let me think about this. I kind of come from, I think, what my unique perspective or my unique position or things that kind of make things a little different for me is I have three different angles towards the audio industry. One is I started out designing, building, and renting sound equipment, but I started mainly just designing speaker systems, trial and error, learning everything I could, and working my way up to developing full-blown concert systems that have toured the world with various bands, as well as licensing out products like the Micro Wedge series to EAW and and more currently the Sound Tools line of stuff that we manufacture of testers and cables and cat products. So from the design side, the second angle I have is in order to test all of these designs and speaker designs and such, I learned to mix sound. Well, actually, I started renting out sound equipment to bands and parties and worked my way up kind of from 2 speakers in a Toyota Celica to having a 22,000 square foot warehouse and 30 employees and, renting equipment to, supplying sound for Coachella Festival and many decades with the Chili Peppers and Pearl Jam and large bands. So I have a business angle of learning that from the ground up, kind of, again, trial and error. And then the third perspective is in order to test the systems and keep the gear rented, I learned to mix sound. So I developed skills as a sound engineer and have mixed Rage Against the Machine, Soundgarden, Chili Peppers, Blink-182, Offspring, and taken bands from clubs to arenas many times and mixed some of the largest venues in the world, Live Earth and 3 Coachellas, and all kinds of big venues. So I have this real world tangible experience with working with the gear. And because of that, I think I'm very fortunate to have those perspectives so I can look at things from the different angles, and each one has its own opinions. Those don't necessarily agree. What's good for a rental company might not be good for an engineer, or what's good for business. I see designs that people make, and I can analyze them and see what their trajectory was, or why it was designed a certain way. Were they designing it for cost effective? Were they designing it for maximum volume with cost total disregard for cost or fidelity? So that's kind of my story of where I am, or how I got to where I am now.
Dave, I'm going to jump in if you don't mind. I want to start this one here because this stuff fascinates me. It really does. Sean and I are, like we're late '80s kids, like mid-late '80s kids, and that's when we start playing in the bars. Of course, we were used to the big butterfly cabinets, and you're pushing a lot of air. The trend nowadays seems to be towards smaller, compact, Bose type speakers. Like, what's your thoughts on that? Like, what's more efficient and more effective?
Well, those are two separate questions. More
Okay.
efficient, more effective. Those big butterfly cabinets and all the horn-loaded stuff was definitely more efficient. And, back in the 70s and 80s and into the 90s, the amplifier, one of the big changes to the audio industry, many changes, but it has been the amount of watts per rack space that we have available to us, or watts per pound. And you can actually do calculations on that. And go back in the late 80s, early 80s, late 70s, you're looking at DC 300s, 150 watts per channel for 3 rack spaces or 4 rack spaces. So you're looking at 100 watts per rack space.
Okay.
Now, like a PowerSoft X8 has got 5,000 watts per channel times 4 in a single rack space. And there's some depth to it, so it's not quite fair because the amps are twice as deep, but still you're looking at 20,000 watts per rack space versus 100 watts. So several orders of magnitude, or an order of magnitude, several orders of magnitude, order of magnitude and a half, double. But so that ties in, or that dovetails in with back then with very little power and speakers that didn't handle a lot of power. In order to cover large spaces, we needed to get every bit of efficiency out, use these big horns to get the volume we needed to cover. And also we didn't have a lot of the processing. Now we can use much less efficient boxes and put a lot more power into them and conserve truck space, preserve sight lines, reduce load-in times and weights, and reach similar or higher levels than we were able to before with these more efficient but cumbersome designs.
Less injury too, I'm sure.
Less injury, and in audio, you never get something, like many things or everything in life, you never get something for nothing. So if you put a big horn in front of something, you might gain efficiency, but the bandwidth is reduced. So you lose fidelity. That's the downside of the big horns. But the big horns had some advantages in that the speaker didn't have to move very far to create a lot of output. And putting a modern speaker on a horn, or even comparing apples to apples, where you have a horn loaded or non-horn loaded, the horns have capabilities of moving a lot more air with a lot less work being done, or a lot less motion. So you can get a lot more impact, a lot more punch. So there's a transient advantage to the horn loaded stuff, which isn't realized with these modern, what they call bass reflex boxes, where you see the speaker up front.
You said something, Dave, that was very insightful for the average, viewer of this. They wouldn't get, but you talked about conserving truck space, conserving sight lines. Those are things that, yourself, you would think of that the average person would never think of, and probably the average musician would never think of. I mean, you're really getting into the weeds and trying to put something together that makes a lot of sense for the show that you're running. Yes, yeah.
All of the factors interplay. I came up with a formula quite a few years ago, or not formula, but a series of factors for speaker design. And originally it was 5, and I've expanded it to 6. And they are size, weight, maximum volume, fidelity, cost, were the original 5, and then I added in ergonomics or deployability as the 6th. So if you take those 6 factors, you can overlay those or use those as a viewing glass and look at just about any sound system out there and read into the mind of the designer or the manufacturer or the trajectory line they followed. you can apply it to just about any product that creates sound or modify those to look at anything. And they all work against each other. So if you make something louder, tends to cost more, get heavier, and get bigger. If you want to keep size down, size down while maintaining volume and fidelity, then it gets really expensive. If cost is no object, you can start to make things that sound really good, to get really small and get really loud. But there's a limitation in all of these. So when you look at a design, writing down those 6 factors, like when I'm designing, I'll take those 6 factors into account and I say, what is the application for what I'm designing? Where do I want to end up? Usually I look at cost last, but what do I want to look at? How does it have to be loud? How important is fidelity? How important are the factors? You prioritize those and build around that prioritization. And if you do that, you have a high probability of coming up with a product that will be well suited for the application.
So when you're putting that together then, how much of it is the actual artist that goes out and says, this is the perfect sound, versus they trust in you to do it for them? And the reason why I ask that is because you mentioned a lot of bands that you've mixed before that are world-class acts, but they also kind of had the handle back in the day of being known as like the stripped down kind of, bare bones raw sound, right? So how much of that are they trusting you to put together for them versus them actually having input and feedback in it? It's not unlike trusting a contractor. They know what the outcome they desire at this point in their career, whatever point in their career is, right? And then hopefully they hire the people that will use the proper tools and hardware in order to accomplish that. So the bands usually, or very rarely, will demand a certain type of system or have a lot of say in the type directly. They'll more look at who else have you mixed, what other band is touring with what, not even that. Who's the engineer? Who do we want to mix us based on a reputation? They've either heard you mix or you come highly recommended, or you've grown up with them. But they're going to trust those decisions mainly to the engineer. And it's up to the engineer to kind of pick the proper tools for the application.
So Dave, tell me, what would you rather be doing? Would you rather be home designing these systems, or would you rather be on the road mixing the bands?
That's a great question. I started the company in late 1979, early 80-ish. So we're going 40 years now. My first tour was Black Flag in 1985 on the Slip It In tour. I spent some time up in your neck of the woods on that.
Yeah.
Traveling around in a van and a rental truck. Went on to do a Danzig Soundgarden tour in late 80s. After those Black Flag tours, I shut everything down, rebuilt all the systems to actually tour, because we didn't have wheels on anything back then. Everything was hand carried in hand trucks. So I rebuilt it portable. So I'd say I started really touring maybe in 1989. And in 2017, January of 2017 was my last tour that I did. It was Chili Peppers. And I'd been slowly whittling out all the bands. For a while there, I was mixing. There was a point in time where I was mixing Rage Against the Machine, Offspring, and Chili Peppers, and bouncing between the 3 tours.
Wow.
And I slowly stopped taking I just focused purely on Chili Peppers. And then when they were off, I was off. Relearned how to be at home, not traveling, which was a skill in itself. That's going back that way. And then in 2017, I was like, okay, I've done enough. There's no show bigger than I've done. There's no band that I haven't worked for. I got to do the Soundgarden reunion tour, which was and the Blink reunion tours, kind of a throwback. And so that was, I went back to my roots of designing, which is what got me into this in the first place. And to be honest, yes, I miss some of that travel and miss some of that. How can you not? I've gotten to see some amazing things. But to have someone send me an itinerary right now would be not very high on my list.
Sure.
I'm going to go somewhere. I want to go where I want to go, not where someone tells. In the famous words, can I swear on this?
Absolutely.
Yeah. In the famous words of Zach De La Roca, fuck you, I won't do what you tell me.
Yes. That was funny. I was just thinking about that when you were talking about those three bands in particular, Rage Against the Machine, Chili Peppers, and Offspring, and then Blink-182 too. It's very similar to that punk funk style. It's like all four of those bands really have a very much in your face kind of power punk background, but kind of Black Flag, kind of like, I understand where you're coming from. Is that your style of music that you prefer?
That's what I was really good at. I was a master of a 3- and 4-piece rock band. You get 5 or 6 members in there, and I was like, I'm really good with that raw power, clean, very simple energy. I always like the energy of shows, and focusing on taking that band energy and delivering it to the audience as purely and powerfully as possible, and seeing that interaction and being a part of helping make that happen. It's fun to me.
Cool.
So I'm a drummer myself, Dave. So I have to ask, when Dave had mentioned those different bands. So obviously you've mixed a bunch of different drummers that have a bunch of different playing styles. Like I think of Chad Smith, who is just incredible. They're all incredible. But so when you're going in, so myself, and obviously because I play a lot of clubs, I hate the sound check, because it's just, there might be somebody there, you might be in a bar where they're eating lunch and you don't want to make noise. What are your sound checks like with these guys? Because like I say, I have to think, having opened for bands before, oftentimes that's the only time they get to practice. So they might want to frig around on the kit for a little bit beforehand. But what's the process of that? Because like I say, different players, all great players, all amazing players. But how do you make that work?
That's great. And yeah, another band I mixed for a while was, speaking of awesome drummers, was Foo Fighters. So I got to work with Dave Grohl quite a bit, and that was a pleasure and an honor. That's interesting. I just did a YouTube video on exactly that, the sound check process. And I've been an outlier in that, I think, compared to that standard hit the kick drum for 15 minutes and annoy the shit out of everybody.
Yeah.
To me, that's a complete waste of time. All of those single mic, single instrument sound check scenarios where, if you look at it mathematically, there's several scenarios. You have one mic on, one instrument playing, and then you have all mics on and one instrument playing. So let's say you lit up all the mics on stage, and then you just hit the kick drum, and then you get additional information. You'd hear not only the kick drum come in the kick mic, but you'd hear how much kick drum bleeds into the other mics and other resonances that aren't going to go away. You can gate it and get your gate, but you can see what it sounds like with it bleeding and everything. Then you also have the all the instruments playing, but only one mic on. So the whole band's like sound checking, but you only turn on the kick mic. Now you hear the reverse. You hear the kick drum coming to the mic, and you hear how much bass is bleeding in, how much guitar is bleeding, cymbals, all that other crap bleeding into that mic. So that's a whole nother set of valuable information. And then you have all mics off, right, before you start the show. All mics on, all instruments playing later on in the show. So these various scenarios all provide different information sets to the engineer. My preferred way of sound checking, and once I figured it out, it has been absolutely wonderful, because I'd tell the band as soon as I start working with them, hey, I got a way of sound checking that I prefer to do it. And what I'm going to do is, the techs and I are going to go up on stage. We'll make sure everything works mostly. If we run out of time, we might not get everything working. We'll get everything important working. And we're going to dial up a rough mix for your monitors. And I'll dial up a rough out. I might get some sound. I'll make sure everything kind of works. Then you guys go up on stage and just play for me, please. Whatever you want. You can play new songs, you can go through the set. I don't care what you do. All I care about is that you play songs, as many as you possible. And there's a psychological aspect. I want the band to become comfortable on stage. I want them to hear, I want them to know what their feedback, I want them to have as much time acclimating to that stage environment so that when the show starts, they're comfortable. Because if they play well, it makes my job easier.
Sure.
The second aspect to that is once they're all playing, I'll bring that kick mic up by itself and I can hear the other instruments bleed. Maybe I'll go move a mic closer to an instrument so I get a better ratio of the direct versus room sound off that instrument. Because as you move a mic closer, and then turn the gain down a little bit, it's like turning the room down.
Right.
So I can kind of get a feel for all of the sound. I'll turn the kick up, I'll get that kick sound. Then I'll turn that down, bring the snare up, bring the toms. Toms I'll usually worry about later, not hit enough. We'll do those. Bring the bass up, guitar up. I'll do each instrument, kind of get a rough level. Then I'll bring kick, snare, hat up. Then I'll put kick, snare, hat, and bass together. Check that level out. I'll try bass and guitar together. I'll try guitar and drums together. I'll try vocals with drums. And I'll play these things all off of each other. While the band's playing, and I warned them beforehand, I'll be turning stuff up and down in the mains. You're going to hear this stuff come up and down. Don't let that throw you off. I'm going to, and by the end of your check, you'll hear everything. Because that's another factor the band really needs to experience is the effect of the main PA coming back to them.
Sure.
And now I've got all this valuable information that I will never get elsewhere of what does all the drum mics sound lit up with the whole band playing, but none of the other mics brought up in fader. Very quickly, I can get a rough mix, and very quickly we can acclimate, get the band comfortable, and end up with a quality situation so much easier than hitting an individual instrument, which the drummer never hits at the right. If you have a drummer if you have the tech hit it or the drummer hit it one at a time, the way they hit the kick drum, the way that beater taps the head, the hold time on the head, or whether it's bouncing off, are completely different than when the drummer's playing a fast song or a slow song. And the same thing with and I realize again that when the show happens, there'll be an adrenaline factor as well, where everybody will hit harder, the lights will light up more on the clips, but at least I'm close and the band's close and I'm getting comfortable as well. And I can learn a band very quickly that way.
You can't go wrong there, Dave, because not only did you create the gear, but you're doing sound for them. So now, are you one of these guys that walks around with the iPad and you can mix it that way? Because I mean, really, you know your system, you know where it's going to work in any particular room. And is it that easy for you? You're going to have it right down to your little iPad and...
Yes and no. I mean, a lot of times this applies whether I'm mixing on systems. You know, the systems I've built, we pretty much couldn't compete building against the large manufacturers around the early 2000s. We kind of retired most of our large format. We still have monitors and smaller. But this system applies to, and I mix on anybody's rig. It doesn't matter. The system is irrelevant. I got to learn the system, hearing the band through it. As far as mixing on an iPad, I can do it. Personally, what I prefer to do is I either tour with a tech, or if I'm touring clubs or if I'm doing other venues, I'll work with the house tech, whoever's system it is. If I have a system, I have a tech, and if I don't have a system, the system will have somebody there.
Right.
And what I've done is just developed a series of very simple hand signals, and I'll go stand out in the middle of the various points in the various places in the room, and I will just call the mix from there. And I use those same hand signals to communicate with the band and with the techs. Where, you know, you want kick drum, right? You can probably guess what all these are.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Symbols, yeah. Yeah.
Right. And then
bass.
Right?
Yeah, guitar.
Uh-huh.
Vocal.
On that side. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
You know, so you can
We could work for you.
You can communicate. Then I'll go farther down the rabbit hole and say like vocal center, right? And then I'll go 2K down.
Okay.
Or main PA 400 up. And I can EQ a system that way. I can kick drum, pan more to that side. You know, so you can go very quickly. I'll go through this hand signals, and I can pretty much say anything that needs to be done and stand out there and mix from a remote location just with someone watching me. And I don't like to use a radio. As soon as you use a radio, you're listening, you're talking, you've lost your focus, and you're hearing something. It takes longer to do, and it takes you away from the environment you're trying to be in.
Here's what I'm getting. I'm getting your sound checks are probably very fun to take part in. And I think that's a big thing for musicians. I mean, most guys, guitar players tend to like sound checks. They like the one. A lot of people I know don't like sound checks. I've talked to all kinds of different people. They just, it's usually in the middle of the day when they'd rather be sleeping or doing something else. It's taking up time. You know, but what you're saying to me sounds really fun. Just sitting there and jamming while you're getting the sounds. I mean, that's like going back to your basement.
That's right.
You know?
That's why we got into this, right?
Right.
And, you know, Chili Peppers, for about 15 years, decided they don't like sound checks. And to the point where we would sound check some tours, they would sound check the first day or the first two shows and never, ever enter the venue again until, walk on stage again until it was showtime.
But you have
right
each
on.
venue. You can't really do that. I mean, you would have had such different rooms, coliseums, outdoor shows. Lord God in heaven, there would have been a lot of variations, I would think.
Again, you can mathematically calculate this stuff out. So if you have a high quality tech, you have high quality techs on stage, and you're touring with a backline set, and those techs are able to tune that backline very similarly and tune the drums similarly every day within a certain range. And I would do things like take photographs of all the settings, guitar rig settings, bass, pedals. If we got lost, they fiddle out and they lose those things. They start seeing me take pictures of them. They know where to find them, or I'd reference them back. So now we have a good starting point. So I pay a lot of attention to getting the same sound. So theoretically, if we can get close to the same sound radiating from the stage every day, the channel, then it gets into this concept of what EQs what. And that's a whole another video thing I did was the channel EQ on the console is to fix the microphone instrument combination such that when you listen on headphones or you record it, that signal sounds correct, or whatever you determine to be correct. And that's your board. So theoretically, if your stage sounds are close to the same every day and use the same mics in the same spot every day, then your gain knob, you have the same console, or you take a photo and you transfer those settings to a similar console every day, then your gain settings will stay the same. Your EQ settings will stay the same. Nothing changes on the console, because what's changing from day to day is the venue.
Yes.
Or the sound system, and the venue.
Or the energy of the band, to be fair. Maybe they're not going to be...
the energy of the band we can deal with, but that's a range that you learn, right? But the energy band, you can't learn through sound check. That energy is a variable anyways. That doesn't go away. So we can take that off the table because it's not solvable. So now, if your room's changing every day, then use a separate reference point. You play a CD, you use a common signal point to tune the room speaker system / venue combination. And you tune that to be the same using triangulation. Use your headphones versus the sound of the room versus measurement equipment, and you triangulate kind of a similar sound. So theoretically, if A equals B, if the sound coming in equals the sound at the headphone at the left-right bus, and from the left-right bus with all your signal input through the room system room combination equals C, the sound that you get there, then theoretically A should equal C. Yep. So you should be able to create, without ever having the band or instruments play through the PA, within a somewhat realm of accuracy, you should be able to get a similar sound every day out of multiple systems in multiple venues in varying in size, and paying attention to that detail.
I'm presuming by the amount of phone calls that you get to go back on the road, you must have been doing something right then, Dave. Let's be honest. So whatever you're doing works.
Yeah. Worldwide consistency was definitely a goal, being able to have the same sound on every continent in every venue size, or at least a similar. I mean, and then the things you can't control, like the echoiness of a large venue versus small. Those are things we learn. And then there's one more variable I'll add in, just like we can't control the energy level of the band. We also rarely or have limited control over the acoustics change of the venue from sound check time to show time. And we have many factors. We have the presence of the people being more absorptive. So we've got to learn that, but that's going to happen. Another thing we have is temperature changes. The heaters, the outside gets colder. If we're outdoors, it gets warmer. That drastically affects the sound as well. The absorption of sound in the various temperatures, the frequency response changes, as does the speed of sound, which means if you have the signal coming from two different places and the speed, and one is longer than the other, then when the speed of sound changes, when they might sum at a certain frequency now, but when the heats up and sound speeds up, they have a cancellation in addition to a different frequency. So the EQ of the room is constantly changing thermally. Those are controlled by an interactive EQ you're doing. So that would be like your house EQ that is dealing with the room acoustics.
So when you're mixing the band, you're doing front house, and I've always thought of this, but I've never had the opportunity to ask, so I will. Are you essentially the quarterback of the whole operation? So you're doing front house, but are you telling the monitor guys what, like, are you sort of in control of all that? And the reason why I'm asking is I remember there was a concert here a number of years ago. Motley Crue was playing, and half the PA went down for about 30 seconds, and it just seemed like they got it going again. There was no panic. There was no nothing. And to me, I was just looking around, what the hell's going on? And they were able to fix it, and there was a sense of calm. And I'm wondering, is it the front house guy that kind of is the quarterback that takes care of all that, or how would that work?
The dynamics change from artist to artist. But I would say that it's more of a dance with several players involved. And it's, you have the front of house, you have your region of control. So for front of house, my goal is to connect the artist with the audience. The monitor engineer is to make sure the artist is able to connect with themselves and each other. So we have, sometimes our goals are aligned and sometimes they're not. But I won't do anything damaging. I'll try and minimize anything I do that's damaging to the monitor engineer. And the monitor engineer has the same thing where they try and minimize things that affect me negatively. So having a cooperative respect for those territories and going out of your way to help each other optimize their job. And it goes further than that in that that's just the sound department. Now you've got sightline issues, which, it might sound good if the PA's hung in a certain spot, but then it blocks a section. So now I've got to work with the venue, or I've got to work with the production manager to make sure those seats can get sold. So I'm making concessions for that. Or you have lighting issues where lights block speakers, or there's reflections off of screens or scrims in front of speakers. So now we're dealing with the video department. Now we're dealing with the lighting department. So all of these departments have their trajectory, and all the other departments in an optimum situation are making concessions to keep the overall goal and focus, which is to provide an everlasting memory and enjoyable experience for the concert goer, for the viewer.
That's awesome. Like right there, I think probably a lot of our audience, and probably any audience who watches this video, gets a pretty much good idea of there's so much more to the show than just watching the guys up on stage. That was perfect, Dave. Honest to God, I was right there. It's like, yeah, there's a lot of things, a lot of variables that could go wrong. To Sean's point, what if something does go wrong? Like who's troubleshooting and all that jazz. That's a great explanation. I have one more question for you. 40 years, what's been your favorite gig you've ever done?
Oh my goodness. I don't really have a favorite gig, but I do have some highlights.
All right.
I do have some highlights. Tour-wise, mixing the Soundgarden reunion tour was unbelievably cool. I mean, it was just an honor, and I've known those guys since The very first non-Black Flag tour I did
Mhm.
when them and Soundgarden Danzig co-headline. The Blink 182 is probably the most fun tour, just because they are in real life as they seem to be. They are typecast as themselves on tour, and it was fun. It was just playful, and you could kind of do anything you wish. The sky's the limit for just having a good time, both on Showtime and non-Showtime. I mixed a Free Tibet concert in DC, I believe, and Chili Peppers was headlining, and Rage Against the Machine was the second to last band. And I was the front of house engineer for both artists. And I came in, and they had an A and B console set up. And I had Chili Peppers I was supposed to mix on the A console and Rage on the B console, which meant I had to sound, and it was a quick turnover. So I was supposed to be line checking Rage while I was mixing Chili Peppers. And I presented a conundrum. And so what I did was I said, look, you have the same snake on both. What I want you to do is pull the quick latch on the main snake for the B system and plug it into the A system for Rage, and then plug it back for Chili Peppers. So they just moved the snake latch over. And then I overlaid the two sets of mic channels. So kick was exactly where kick was, bass, they were exactly identical mic charts. And then I just remembered the differences between the two. So when the set change came, I just retweaked the analog board. They moved the latch over, and boom, Peppers came right up in Rage's inputs, and it was just goosebump fun.
Yeah, so you mentioned you said you work with the Foo Fighters a bit, right?
Yeah.
So out of the guys that you did mention, who else were maybe some of the other guys that you did mention that you might have worked with over the years?
Let's see. I mixed Social Distortion early on. What else did I mix? It's easy for me to forget these bands. I mixed so many of them. I mixed Pearl Jam a few times as a fill-in. I used to fill in quite a bit. I was a really good engineer for another engineer that had a long relationship that was overlapped with another tour. They could call me and I could fill in for them because I didn't want their gig.
Right.
I would come in and do it. They didn't have to worry about me taking the job.
Right
on. I'm trying to remember. I'm blanking on that.
And it was funny because with the info that Bruce sent me, I mean, like the first thing I was like, holy smoke, like the who's who of music that I grew up listening to, you mix. And I mean, I guess a question for me, I won't peg it as just a drummer thing, but before you go out on a tour, because everybody's endorsed and they all have their preferences and what have you, do you work with the band on, okay, this rig, this drum kit, this, that, or do they just show up and you just kind of make it work with whatever they bring to the party?
It really depends on if I'm coming on the middle of a tour or filling in or taking over for someone, you take whatever they've got and you roll with it. I try not to make a lot of changes until I've learned why they're doing what they're doing, not make assumptions. On the other hand, they might not be there for a reason. So I definitely want to look at possible issues. When I get brought in early, then what I do is I'll go to rehearsals, and similar to the sound check thing, I'll just say, hey, I'm coming to some rehearsals. Can I come to rehearsals and hang out with you guys? And I say, this is what I'd like to do is I'm just going to hang out. I'm just going to sit here and watch. And I just get time. It's the same thing as a band getting acclimated on stage. I want to learn the band. I want to learn when they turn up, what pedals are hitting. I'm trying to understand and remember the way they want to hear themselves. And if I can understand what they want to hear, what the band envisions themselves sounding like, and then I compare that to the albums, and I'll be like, well, on your records, you've got a lot more high end on the guitars than you have in the studio. Is that something? Do you have a preference one way or the other for me to go with this? I see a contrast, or they sound just like the album, because the album is the producer / band combo's interpretation of the music, and the rehearsal is the band's attempt at doing it. Are they getting what they want? Do they want to get more out of it? So I'll try and understand all of those factors. And then I also try and understand what they want that they're not getting. Go working with Soundgarden, Chris came up to me, I'm sitting in rehearsals. He's like, to be honest, I don't sing loud and I have a really hard time hearing myself. And I'm just getting a lot of, guitar sound from the other players. And here's a band that's been broken up for a long time, making sure minimizing any friction or conflicts is of the utmost importance. So I'm trying to understand, how does Kim want to sound? How does Ben want to sound? How does Chris want to sound? And then how can I get it so that Kim and Ben are still happy, but not bumming out Chris?
Right.
And I do things like, I won't tell them what to do, but I will ask things like, can I move your rigs around? I don't want to, you want me to turn down? No, don't turn down. Because I know as soon as they turn down, they're not going to get the feedback sound out of the guitar during that song. Or
and they're going to fucking turn it back up anyhow, so it doesn't matter.
Leave your sound where it is. Where you just let me move the box. I start moving things. I'll move the rigs farther from the drummer, or I'll move them back farther so the drummer can hear with less monitor. If instead of putting a ton of bass and guitar in the drum fill, just move the bass and guitar rigs, start sliding those back so they get more natural sound from the rigs. Move them out a bit to reduce the volume. So you're doing mechanical gain mixing until it sounds correct at the center of stage. Now we got a good solid balance. And then, at one point I had Ben come up to me and say, hey, is it cool if I turn down, can I move my bass rig closer? I said, yeah, of course you can do that. I mean, it's up to you. I mean, what are we going to do? This can't work for live. I said, we're not there yet. Let's get our rehearsal sounds together. By the time you get on a big stage, those rigs are already far apart. Right. And we have room to do that. So kind of working with them to doing things like taking the guitar rig, Marshall stack, and tilting it back an inch or two and putting a lifter in the front so it slightly tilts upward towards the guitar player. All of a sudden it gets really bright. Now they dull it down. Now all of a sudden I don't have as much high frequency guitar floating around the stage. Convincing musicians to sing into mics that are not pointed flat, but rather point them up. So that when they step away from the mic, it's not picking up the guitar or cymbals as much. The high frequency pattern is not pointed at the instruments or pointing them out slightly or in slightly.
People can't learn this shit at school. You just got to pick this up as you go. That's the only way to do it, right?
It's like anything. There's so, on the surface it's simple, but once you get into it, the nuances of the depth are fascinating and endless.
David, that's what I know. I know we're going to post this video. We're going to have 1,000 people ask us, like, ask him this. Why didn't you ask him this? Why didn't you ask him this? I'm going to ask your permission ahead of time. Is that we're going to have to bring you back on here, because I think there's going to be, am I right, Sean? There's going to be a lot of people who are going to ask a ton of questions.
Well, I mean, every time Dave brings something up, because you mentioned the vocal mic being pointed a certain way, and my immediate question was, and then you mentioned something about Chris Cornell earlier. Mixing singers, in my opinion, and I'm not a sound engineer, but that's got to be an art form all on itself. Different pitches, different tones, different, power, different. That's got to be a whole case study in itself, is it not?
Oh yeah, and you start off the bat with helping the singer select a vocal mic that complements their style. I mean, if they're moving the mic a lot, a different mic would be optimum for somebody who stays lips on the mic. Are they on ears? Are they using wedges?
Right.
What's the frequency response of their voice? How loud is the rest of the band? Do we need a lot of rejection in that mic, or is the band quiet and we can have a little more freedom for fidelity in the vocal mic? So there's helping them select that. I try and solve stuff with hardware rather than trying to retrain. Someone cups a mic, I'll try and get them to use a mic that is fairly not as affected by cupping the mic, or doesn't create as negative of an effect than trying to tell them not to cup the mic.
So now all this stuff that we've talked about, and you mentioned YouTube. Do you have a YouTube channel where people can dial into this stuff and get little tidbits and advice and that type of thing?
Absolutely. Yeah, I've got a YouTube channel that I'm very active on, actually. I've been releasing 2 videos per week for a while now. And of all types of subjects, I probably have 80 or 90 videos up there, ranging. I release 2 per week. I've got 2 YouTube. I've got the YouTube regular, publicly accessible. So I'm continuing, and has done for many, many years now, over 10 years, I think, releasing free information to public, just sound tips and mixing styles and photos of stuff, videos of walking through the rat shop, or how I set up the mixing board for chili peppers. And then I recently started a member area. So I release 1 video a week to the public, and I release 2 videos a week to the member area, where I go into more depth, and I'll do videos about like the business of sound and how to charge rental rates is one that I got coming up. And
nice.
I'm doing digital versus analog consoles. I've got a little small format digital, small format analog, and I'm showing the differences between them in the high frequency, low frequency, pulse testing.
See, now we're out of time, Dave, unfortunately, but I wanted to get into I wanted to see if you actually crisscross back into any recording and stuff. And if you have an ear, do you have an ear for both? But we're going to be out of time here tonight. But listen,
I'll come back again. I'll gladly come back and join. You guys are great. It's a pleasure to meet you, Dave and Sean. And hello, everyone.
Well, and Dave, the last thing, are you okay for us to share those channels? Because I think people will be. Okay, perfect.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, Dave Rat. I forget my YouTube channel. If you just search Dave Rat on YouTube, I don't know the actual link. I think it's youtube.com.
I'll find it and I'll post it on there.
There you go.
We'll find you.
Yeah. And you know what?
Go ahead.
I'm going to send you a text, and we'll definitely figure this out to get you back. Because honest to God, man, I could sit here for 2 days, 3 days.
I think the same thing. One asking this, one asking this, one asking this.
Oh, it's great. It's great hanging out with you. And I love doing this. I love talking audio. I love talking to cool people that are interested and enthusiastic.
Yeah, it's just a pleasure to meet you, my friend. And thank you so much for being on our show.
All right. My pleasure, too. And yeah, share the links. And I'll look forward to seeing you guys again.
Absolutely.
We're going to do it soon, brother.
All right.
Dave,
enjoy the weather, Dave.
Cool.
Peace
out,
bud.